12,000 years ago, if there's a really advanced civilization, why would astronomy play as big of a role in them where everything is pointing to X, Y, and Z stars?
Well, first of all, let's consider what we mean by advanced. What is an advanced civilization? Are we really an advanced civilization? Do we look around at much of our culture that we would say, that's incredibly advanced? Or are we talking tech? Are we talking tech? We're technologically
and like
advanced.
Scientifically, yeah.
Yeah, we believe that that is advanced. And that is one of the mistakes in looking for a quote-unquote advanced civilization in the past, is that we tend to be looking for ourselves in our past. Whereas it's possible for a civilization to be advanced in other ways. We could not measure longitude. Very important issue if you're a navigator and a sailor. We could not measure longitude until 1760s, 1750s, and sometime in the second half of the 18th century. It took the creation of a very precise marine chronometer in order to be able to calculate what your longitude is. Otherwise, in the middle of a stormy night, you could find yourself 300 miles west of where you thought you were and crashing into a coastline. It's a really good thing to know longitude. There was I mean, £1 million in the 18th century was a lot of money. There was £1 million British prize for cracking the longitude problem. And it wasn't until the second half of the 18th century that it was solved.
Wow.
So it's weird that on ancient maps, copied from even more ancient source maps, there are precise longitudes, precise relative longitudes. This is one of the things that suggests to me that a civilized... the second thing is those maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. Thirdly, and most important, they show Antarctica. Our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820. So if I find a map from 1520 showing Antarctica, where the map maker informs us that he based his map on much older source maps that were falling to pieces and that he that will fall completely apart, he's preserved the information in those maps on his maps. He's copying from older, and there is Antarctica. So did they just make it up? That's what
Why do we still call it Antarctica? That was another thing I was like...
Well, opposite of the Arctic.
Yeah, but
They're very recent map.
It's like, bro, he called it Antarctica. Why don't you just look at the map? You're going to call it the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we call it Antarctica. They used to call it Terra Australis, the southern land. If you go for the Orontius Phineas map, for example, you'll find a much better reference.
Yeah, I thought that map said Antarctica. That's where I got tripped up.
Oh, I actually am really excited that we're talking about Antarctica.
Yeah, Antarctica is an interesting place.
This is my newest rabbit hole.
It's one of those great... You see, there's Antarctica. That's the Orontius Phineas.
To the right?
There's South Africa, and there's Antarctica, and there's the tip of South America, almost touching Antarctica. It's a bit bigger than it is today, but it would have been like that during the last ice age. That's a map from 1531, and what they're saying in the legend is that here in this map I expose regions that neither Eudoxus nor, I forget the names of all the ancient maps, none of them knew about it. They were hidden in darkness, but here they are. Hidden in darkness, I suggest they're hidden in darkness on ancient maps that Orontius Phineas copied from.
Wow.
It's an anomaly that it's sitting there, and it's not good enough to say that those map makers just wanted to balance the world, so they put a fantasy continent there, which later turned out to actually be there.
Right.
That's roughly what they're saying now. So that suggests to me a culture that was capable of exploring and mapping the Earth during the last ice age. The second issue is precisely astronomy. It's ancient knowledge of precession, which, again, our culture attributes to the Greeks, roughly between 300 BC and 100 BC. They're supposed to have been the discoverers of precession. Precession is very hard to observe. In a single lifetime, it's a fraction of an inch on the horizon, the change. So you have to keep records over long periods of time. You have to have a system that preserves those records and passes them down. So it's the knowledge of precession that is manifested in ancient mythology and in ancient traditions, often traditions that speak of a global flood. The Vedas themselves contain numbers that are related to precession. Again, I don't want to get too boring, but precession proceeds at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, and this is the key number that is found in ancient mythology around the world, and variations of that number. So 72 plus 36 is 108. 108 is another precessional number. 108 divided by 2 is 54. That's another precessional number. That's why on the bridge at Angkor Thom in Angkor in Cambodia, you have 54 figures on either side of the bridge. And what are they doing? They're hauling on the body of the serpent Vasuki, who is wrapped around Mount Mandara, and they are churning the Milky Ocean. The argument is that this is a symbol for precession, that is taking place there, and the numbers are multiplied. And another example I often give is the Great Pyramid itself. And it's very important, I made this point at the beginning, it's very important that when people want to check this calculation, that they use the true original height of the Great Pyramid, the 481 feet that it would have risen to, rather than its rather stunted 450 plus feet today. When you use the true original height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And when you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Now, why does 43,200 matter? It's 600 times 72. It's another precessional number. It's a number generated by the precessional motion of the Earth itself. And there we enter a very clever piece of work. Great Pyramid is almost perfectly aligned to true north. It's within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. It's an error, but it's really good. When you look at a monument on that scale, 6 million tons, 481 feet tall, you know, and you get it within 3/60ths of a degree of true north, you are doing very accurate work. And you were saying something else.
You think they figured that out back in the day?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They were like,
they used astronomy. They used astronomy to figure it out. And
but no, that they messed up a little.
I think they did the best they could. I think they did the best they could. We also have to take account of movements of the Earth itself. They
So it might have been right at the time.
There might have been a slight shift in the tectonic plates underneath. I'm not sure, but the fact is it's 3/60ths off now.
Okay.
What it does tell us, apart from the level of accuracy, is that when they made that monument, they wanted to lock it in to the key cardinal directions. It's perfectly north, perfectly true south, perfectly true east, perfectly true west, within 3/60ths of a single degree. Then the cardinal directions of this planet mattered to them. They were speaking to the Earth with that monument. Secondly, it's located on latitude 30 degrees north, give or take a few seconds of arc. And latitude 30 degrees north is 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole. Okay, so that's not an insignificant latitude. It's a significant latitude. It seems like the monument is speaking to the Earth. And then we find that it encodes the dimensions of the Earth on a scale provided by a key motion of the Earth itself, namely the Earth's precession, operating at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. Multiply that by 600, you get 43,200. That's the scale the pyramid is built on, 1 to 43,200. So it's a monument that speaks to the Earth, that is aligned to the cardinal directions of the Earth, and that encodes the dimensions of the Earth on a scale defined by the Earth itself.
And nobody would object to this at all?
Nobody that I know of, once they get the measurements right and realize that they're not dealing with a 450-foot tall monument, but a 481-foot tall monument. Nobody disputes that. But pi, which is used to calculate the diameter and circumference of a circle, is built into the Great Pyramid. This is broadly accepted by them. It's just that they regard it as a coincidence.
And your theory is also that the ancient Egyptians did this, right? Because you said they did most of the work.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think they did. I think it was finished off. You define the very moment you start building that 52-degree slope into all the sides, you're defining what the apex is going to be.
Right.
That's there from the beginning.
And what was their daily ritual use for the pyramids of Giza that you theorized?
Well, actually, nobody has any idea. The Great Pyramid was sealed. It was a sealed monument. So in roughly 900 AD, forgive me if I don't give you the exact date, give or take 50 years, the Caliph al-Mahmud, who was running Egypt at the time, wanted to get inside the Great Pyramid. This is 400 years before the earthquake. The facing stones are still in place. He could not find the true entrance to the Great Pyramid. It turned out that it could have been found. A according to accounts, there was some sort of almost like a button that you pressed, and the doorway would slide, the facing stones would slide away, and you could find the true entrance. But he couldn't find that. So, but he did know that other pyramids had their entrance in the north face, other older pyramids, like the Pyramid of Unas. He knew they had their entrance in the north face. So he started hacking away at the north face of the Great Pyramid. And that is the entrance through which you will have gone when you entered the Great Pyramid. It's called Mamun's Hole. He and his team hacked it out with sledgehammers and chisels, and they broke their way in to the north face. And then as they were doing so, they heard a block falling in a hollow space. And then they knew they were onto something. That block that fell, caused by the vibrations that they had caused, must have been in some kind of passageway or chamber. So they headed towards that sound, and that's where they found the original passageway system of the Great Pyramid, which after you've gone through Mamun's Hole, gone around a little corner where it's all cut out of the rock, and then you find yourself going up into first of all, the ascending corridor, and then the Grand Gallery, which is a most majestic structure. They found the original entrance system in that way, and now the true original entrance is open, but it's not used by tourists who enter the Great Pyramid.
Okay, I want to talk about Antarctica. Because I think this is going to be the new obsession. I feel like it's trending super high. Who knows if there's any truth to it, but a friend of ours, who will remain nameless, went there. Got to go on a cool experience, trip, etc. And he said a couple interesting things. He said the mountains look eerily pointy and four-sided. He said way more mountainous than he thought it would be. I think the illusion, maybe from looking at maps and watching penguins, is
by the way, you can see
flat
mountains. You can see mountains on the Orontius Phineas map version.
Oh, is that what the little etchings
around the
are?
edges there?
Interesting.
Those are mountains.
Now, he also said this. He said a couple things. He said there is a pact with every country that has a slice of it that they will not dig or remove any minerals from Antarctica. And he even said that a scientist was there, said to them, World War III will not start until one of these countries breaks that pact. They are clearly protecting or preserving something that may or may not be under, I believe it's 3 miles, Mark was saying earlier, at its thickest of ice. Now, Mark, maybe you should describe the thing that you were saying before about there was a time where Antarctica...
I was reading an article that perhaps 90 million years ago, there was a lush rainforest that is now covered in miles of ice on the Antarctic continent.
Yeah, that's probably true. If you go back that far, you would find that the Earth's climate was very different from how it is today. And there's undoubtedly a time, they found fossils on Antarctica, there's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species?
Yes, this is where it gets tricky.
And this is where it gets tricky. The Homo sapiens line descends from a line that goes back about 6 million years, not much further than that, if we accept conventional evolutionary theory. So 6 million years ago, Antarctica is supposed to have been as cold and as frozen as it is today. Now, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, which is my first book tracing the possibility of a lost civilization, I was very interested in Antarctica. And I was interested in it because of the work of a previous researcher called Charles Hapgood. Charles Hapgood wrote a number of very important books. One of them is called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, which precisely goes into this issue of ancient maps that don't fit our understanding of what the world was, how the world was supposed to be known at that time. And another is called The Path of the Pole. And he proposed a phenomenon that he called Earth crust displacement, whereby from time to time, the entire outer crust of the Earth, like the skin of an orange, might shift, leaving the core of the Earth in place, so that it could so if you imagine a very loose orange skin, the fruit is inside, it's staying in place, but you're shifting the skin around it. Well, obviously then, if that happens, Antarctica could have been in warmer latitudes and could have been shifted into colder latitudes.
And how often does this happen?
Well, does it happen at all is the first question. I mean, of all the theories I've looked at and supported, this is the one that I've come in for the most criticism for. And I've been much more interested recently in the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the notion that a cataclysm occurred around 12,800 years ago, caused by impacts of comet fragments, and we can go into that. But when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, although I was interested in comets, I was more interested in Earth crust displacement. And the standard academic response to that is, look, Antarctica's been frozen for millions of years, and that rules out the whole Earth crust displacement argument. I think that even those who are still researching this field would prefer it to be the mantle rather than the crust of the Earth that moves. Again, it's very technical, that moves in one piece. There's a...
But the idea is...
There's an Italian admiral called Flavio Barbiero who wrote an article for my website suggesting that Earth crust displacement could be kicked off by a comet impact where it hits the Earth a glancing blow and causes a shift of this kind taking place. But by and large, I don't argue these days that Antarctica and Earth crust displacement are the mechanism we should be looking at. I'm much more interested in the very solidly scientifically grounded Younger Dryas impact. Back in 1995, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, I was searching around for many possibilities that could have caused a global cataclysm in the range of 12 to 13,000 years ago, because that's what all the astronomers pointed out, 12 to 13,000 years ago. And Hapgood's theory seemed to me a very valuable and useful one. I still won't write it off. I won't dismiss it entirely, but I've shifted in the direction of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, simply because I'm in a constant argument with mainstream academia. And the issue to me, the most important issue to me, is the issue of a global cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age. What caused that cataclysm is a secondary issue. The cataclysm itself is the primary issue. And I found the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis a better, much more scientifically grounded explanation for that cataclysm than the notion of Earth crust displacement.
But do any archaeologists or any of these prehistorians dispute the Younger Dryas?
There's still a lot of argument around it. There's about 60 major scientists who are involved in the Comet Research Group. They're all credentialed scientists. They've all published dozens of papers in peer-reviewed journals, including Nature, including scientific reports, and many, many others on the hypothesis. But there's also a group of academics who are opposed to it and dispute that any impact ever took place. And then, even in those who do accept that the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm, some think that it may have been caused by solar activity rather than by comet impact.
How would that work?
Well, it could work at the end of the Younger Dryas. There are two moments in the Younger Dryas. The beginning is 12,800 years ago. It's a very strange moment in Earth history. This is when the world's climate, which has been warming up for a few thousand years, the Ice Age is still very much present. Have big ice caps on North America, big ice caps on Northern Europe, but it's been warming up gradually. And then 12,800 years ago, two things happened at once. First, a sudden cataclysmic drop in climate. It gets incredibly cold. As cold as it was at the peak of the Ice Age more than 20,000 years ago. It's incredibly cold, but then puzzlingly, there's a release of water into the world ocean. I say puzzlingly because when the Earth is freezing, you would not expect meltwater to be going into the world ocean. It should be staying on the ice caps. And I cite the work of Cesare Miliani and his work on the submergence of Bahamian corals. This is how do you know that sea level rose? There are certain corals that can only exist within a certain number of feet of the sea's surface. And
when they need the sunlight.
Yeah, and when they drown, that tells you the sea level has risen. And they point to a significant sea level rise 12,800 years ago at exactly the moment of this deep freeze. The comet impact hypothesis explains that because it says that the shock at the heat of the impact of large fragments of a comet on the North American and European ice caps would have been sufficient to release that freezing water into the world ocean, to cut the Gulf Stream. That's the central heating system of our planet. It's called the global meridional overturning circulation. It's these currents of warm and cold water that flow around the planet, and the Gulf Stream was cut and the Earth got extremely cold. So I think the comet impact hypothesis does best explain that. But
so just real quick, so comet hits, cuts the Gulf Stream. Cutting the Gulf Stream.
It cuts the Gulf Stream because it releases a huge quantity of meltwater from the North American ice cap almost instantaneously.
So the comet hits the ice.
Yeah.
that is in North America
and Europe.
and Europe. That water cuts the Gulf Stream
Yes.
because it releases all this, which was frozen
Freezing water
Gotcha.
goes into the world ocean. And
Temperature plummets.
temperature plummets.
But at the same time, there's much more potential water in the oceans, so that when the temperature does rise, now you have that meltwater.
Well, no, so now we need to go on. 12,800 years ago, in the 1,000 or 1,200 years after that, that's a window when all the great Ice Age megafauna go extinct. That's
megafauna are
saber-toothed tigers,
Right.
woolly mammoths, mastodons,
Right.
giant sloths. The whole collection
Yep.
of famous Ice Age megafauna, they all go extinct in that window. And clearly they didn't go extinct for no reason. It's the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas that made them extinct.
Have you seen the, oh God, what is the gentleman's name? He's a guy who I believe like excavates up in Alaska for gold. Pretty sure it is, I'm forgetting what it is right now. But they're like images of woolly mammoths who have had like their legs completely shattered, but they're intact.
Yeah,
And-
is this a boneyard that's been
Yes,
found?
yeah,
it's
yeah,
the
yeah,
boneyard.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That's right. That's very, very, very interesting. I've not been there. I've not looked into it yet, so I can't speak authoritatively about it.
But it might speak to your opinion right there. Is like,
What I can
else would-
say is that at Serrania de Lindosa in Colombia, there is an 8-kilometer long rock art panel dated to 12,800 years ago, which shows these megafauna. It shows many of the extinct megafauna from that period. To get back to the point, so we have this window of about 1,200 years where the Earth is very cold, the megafauna go extinct. But then 11,600 years ago, just as fast and dramatically as the Earth went cold, the Earth goes warm. You're looking
Okay.
at a 10-degree rise in global temperatures in a couple of hundred years. It goes in geological terms, very rapid and very fast. And sea level rises very quickly.
And what is the cause of that?
11,600 years ago, it's called meltwater pulse 1b. There's another collapse of the ice sheets and huge amounts of water go into the world ocean. Now that could realistically be caused by a sudden burst of solar activity, which melted down those ice sheets. But that's not what I go with. I still prefer the notion that we're dealing with multiple bombardments from comet fragments. And in this case, you're looking at a comet fragment that goes into a world ocean, that sends up a huge amount of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, creates a greenhouse effect, and accounts for the warming that takes place at that time.
So 2 comets. One that cooled things down and one that heated things up.
Yeah.
Any idea why one would cool down and one would heat up?
Depends where the impact is. If the impact's on an ice cap and it's releasing enormous amounts of meltwater into the world ocean, you've got to make the world very cold. If the impact's in a world ocean and it's putting a huge amount of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, it's a
Got it.
greenhouse effect.
Got
And
it.
the world is going to get warmer. It's all theory. It's not fact. What is fact is the sudden warming at the end of the Younger Dryas and the sudden freezing at the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
So we're searching for explanations for that.
We're
That's what
searching for
you subscribe
explanations.
to.
I've picked the one I back, but I'm not claiming that I have to be right. It's what I do think is really important is recognizing this was a global cataclysm. It was sustained. It wasn't just a minute. It went on for 1,000 years plus, and it's in our backyard. It's in very relatively recent human history. We're almost at the edge of history when we go to 11,600 years ago. That's weirdly the date that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is built, 11,600 years ago. That weirdly is the date that Plato's Timaeus and Critias gives for the submergence of Atlantis, 11,600 years ago, before our time.
So what's happening to humanity in this 1,200-year window?
I need to be clear about that.
Yeah.
Okay, because archaeologists roll their eyes at any mention of Atlantis. If you even say the word Atlantis,
Right.
you're automatically regarded as a member of the lunatic fringe.
Okay.
And if you've even said that word, all your work, all the 30 years of work
Right.
you've done, the 1,000 dives that you've done on continental shelves all around the world,
Yeah.
all of those can be written off simply because you said the word Atlantis.
It's flat Earth for archaeologists.
Yeah. It's
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Got
and they detest the use
Now
of
tell us why the Earth is flat.
Well, that's one theory I definitely don't buy into.
No. Give us the Atlantis theory.
So the story of Atlantis comes down to us from Plato. It's expressed in 2 dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias.
Okay.
Plato was writing at around 300 BC.
Does that come from his uncle?
Yeah, it's arguably from a member of his family line, who was the Greek lawmaker Solon,
Solon, yeah.
who did make a famous and documented edict around the year 600 BC.
And he was told in Egypt.
And he was at the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta, and there are these inscriptions on the walls. That temple no longer exists. It's a ruin in the Delta now. There are these writings on the walls, and he asks a priest, what do the writings say? And the priest spoke Greek and ancient Egyptian, and he told Solon what the writings say, that there was this great civilization, that it was destroyed in an enormous flood. Plato, or Solon, refers to it as Atlantis. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. It looks like some attempt to translate into a meaningful Greek phrase what was originally an ancient Egyptian phrase. And that ancient Egyptian phrase, I can tell you pretty much for sure, was the homeland of the primeval ones. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the point is that then Solon asks, when did this happen? And the priests say, they're very relaxed about it. They say, oh, 9,000 years ago. So immediately we have a date that we can put to our calendar. 600 BC, he makes the visit. 9,000 years before that, that's 9,600 BC. Give or take 23 years, that is 11,600 years ago. That's when Göbekli Tepe is built. That's when Meltwater Pulse 1b begins to flood the world oceans. And again, my critics will niggle away at the edges of this and say, well, Meltwater Pulse 1b unfolded over 300 or 400 years. If you average it out, it wasn't that much in any one year. But who says it happened at average rates? Who says there wasn't a big rise and then a smaller rise? You know, these things are very annoying. But the bottom line is 9,000 years before Solon is 9,600 BC. That's the Atlantis date. That's Göbekli Tepe's date. And then secondly, the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt is very important. There's been, I worked with a partial translation. Edfu's in Upper Egypt. It's sort of halfway to Aswan, in southern Egypt. It's kind of middle.
Aswan is the quarry, I believe, where they
Aswan's the quarry where they got a lot of the granite that they brought. It's about 500 kilometers south, but Edfu's a bit further north than that. But it's also on the Nile. Now, the Temple of Horus at Edfu is a relatively recent temple, probably built around 270 BC by the Ptolemaic dynasty of ancient Egypt. These were Greeks who had overtaken ancient Egypt. But although they colonized ancient Egypt colonized their minds, and they became ancient Egyptians, more ancient Egyptian than the ancient Egyptians themselves, in many ways.
It's like when white people go to Hawaii.
All right, guys, we're gonna take a break real quick because you need to upgrade your room. If you still got posters hanging up in your room, that shit looks childish, and you have to upgrade. That's where Displate comes in. Displate is a one-of-a-kind metal poster that captures your unique passions. They are sturdy, magnet-mounted, and last a lifetime. You can customize, collect, rearrange them all. Displate has both branded and artistic work. They have over 1 million designs available. They got official designs from Marvel, DC, both. That's crazy. And the NBA. So whether you want to buy a Displate for yourself or gift a Displate, they have a Floyd Mayweather. I happen to be very good friends, brothers you could even say, with a massive Floyd Mayweather fan. They also have a Guardians of the Galaxy one. That same friend loves Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I could get them a Displate. Displate is unique, easy, it's safe and magnet mounted, so it takes 20 seconds. You don't gotta drill holes in a wall and then pay for it when you move out of your apartment or make your home look bad. Magnet mounted in 20 seconds. Displate delivers its products worldwide in only 4 to 5 business days as well, so it's a perfect alternative, and really not alternative, upgrade for standard posters. To upgrade your room, go to displate.com/flagrant and use our code flagrant at checkout to get 20% off for 1 or 2 Displates. 30% off if you buy 3 or more. So the more you buy, the more you save. Go to displate.com/flagrant. Again, that's displate.com/flagrant right now. Now let's get back to the show. All right, we're gonna take a break real quick because if you're drinking, you might as well drink an adult beverage that's better for you, not some can of beer filled with a bunch of bullshit ingredients you've never heard of, or some cheap-ass vodka that's gonna make your hangover crazy and make your life worse. You need Juneshine. They have tons of easy-to-drink, to-go, better-for-you adult beverage options. They got margaritas, vodka sodas, rum cocktails made with premium ingredients and no added sugar. Unlike traditional canned cocktails that can have 20+ grams of sugar. Again, I don't drink, but if you're gonna drink something that is better for you. Got less sugar, got less carbs, not bullshit ingredients, and best of all, it doesn't give you that crazy, I just had a lot of sugar hangover. You give you a nice, light, bright buzz. Juneshine can be found in over 10,000 stores across the country. It's available at all the big retailers you're already visiting for groceries and alcohol. Whole Foods, Target, Ralph's, Vaughn's, Bevmo, Kroger, all of them. We've worked out a special offer for our listeners as well, as we always do. At any store, you can buy one June Shine package and get the second one for only a penny. That's $12 to $20 off. Fuck that, though. The value dollar amount don't matter. You get two for the price of one. I recommend trying one of their best-selling variety packs. It's a great way to try all their delicious flavors. So to do that, you go to juneshine.com/flagrant and text them a photo of your receipt, and they will Venmo you immediately. That's immediate. Venmo's right in your bank account. You don't gotta wait for a mail-in rebate that you're gonna lose. None of that. Right in your bank account. Just do it. It's that easy. JUNESHINE.com/flagrant. Now let's get back to the show.
Inscribed on the wall of that temple, not in the language of ancient Egypt as was spoken 270 BC, but in Middle Egyptian, which goes back to about 2000 BC, carefully inscribed, and we're informed that it's based on temple archives. See that a temple stood there before the Ptolemies rebuilt that temple, and it stood on the foundations of an even older temple. The archives were preserved. That's what's inscribed on the walls. It's inscribed in Middle Egyptian. It's about 2000 BC, and it tells the whole Atlantis story. It just doesn't call it Atlantis. It speaks of a sacred island. It calls it the homeland of the primeval ones. It speaks of a great serpent that comes from the sky and splits the island in two. It speaks of a huge flood that arises and kills off almost all the divine inhabitants, apart from a few survivors, who then travel around the world. One of the places they go to is Egypt, and they make their first business to build primeval mounds in ancient Egypt that will be the places, the locations of all future temples and pyramids. The Edfu texts are very clear. Now, I just need to make this clear, because I relied on Eve Elizabeth Raymond, who was an early translator of the Edfu texts. But recently, the Edfu texts have been completely translated, every single word, into German by a gentleman called Dieter Kurth, and they've translated it all into German. It would be nice if it were all into English, because that's much more widely spoken language.
What does it say in German? The Jews did not build the pyramid.
It supports everything in the original translation. There's not a single part of the original translation that's debunked by this. It supports it, and it adds information that wasn't there, because the reference in those Edfu texts to the destruction of the homeland of the primeval ones is 7,000 years ago, but that's in Middle Egyptian, which dates back to 2000 BC, so it goes back to 9000 BC again.
And 9000 BC is 11,000.
Yeah, it brings us to the same date. So I think that Egyptologists have been too hasty to dismiss Plato's story.
Real quick, so we can just understand what was said. The snake that comes down, like you said in the Netflix special, we can look at comets as potentially snakes.
Cosmic serpents,
So this comet that comes and hits the island of Atlantis, that's like a direct shot.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But so maybe it doesn't hit exactly the island, but it's hitting close enough where the effects of that hit are going to dramatically affect the island.
And remember, they didn't call it Atlantis. They called it the homeland of the primeval.
And what does that mean, the primeval ones?
The ancient ones lived there. That was their homeland. Whoever
created them.
Who then, their survivors, who included 7 sages, traveled around the world seeking to rebuild their lost civilization.
And we've heard this.
And Egypt was one of the places they went to.
Okay, now, some people say that Azor Plateau might be Atlantis. Have you ever been there? And maybe we can describe really quickly where that is.
Well, it's in the Mid-Atlantic, and on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is interesting because there's a phenomenon called isostasy. Isostasy is the Earth's surface is a little bit fluid. If you put a heavy weight on one bit of it, it's like the end of a seesaw. It's going to force the other bit up. So in Britain, we had an ice cap on northern Scotland. But right now, the Isle of Wight in the English Channel, far to the south, is sinking beneath the ocean. Why is that? Because the ice cap on northern Scotland pushed northern Scotland down and lifted up the Isle of Wight. Since the ice cap's gone, the Isle of Wight is going back underwater.
You see this in the islands off of Italy, like Capri.
Yeah.
Is starting to shift and rotate a little bit.
It's isostasy that causes that.
Okay.
And isostatic rebound in this case. And there is some indication that the ice cap on North America may have had an effect on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and may have raised it to a higher level than it was today.
Oh, so wait a minute.
But I'm not, I need to be clear, I'm not looking for Atlantis there or anywhere. I don't think there was one location. Every story and reference, and I don't think we should be looking for a genetic location for it either.
Right.
Just as it would be really hard to look for a genetic location of America today, the U.S. culture is a multicultural society.
Right.
There's a multi-ethnicity society. I suspect, quote unquote, Atlantis was like that. I suspect that it was all over the world, that it occupied the best real estate on Earth, the lands that are now under a few hundred feet of water, caused by.
But if we knew where
sea
it was, we could at least look for some sort of remains.
If there were if there was a definite heartland for it, I think we should be looking for those remains on flooded continental shelves all around the world, and that's what I spent 7 years of my life doing. Was diving on the continental shelves and finding again and again ruins and structures that weren't supposed to be there. I think there's the whole story of humanity that's missing underwater. And while I'm saying that, I would like to give credit to archaeologists. There is some work now being done, marine archaeology, which isn't any longer just looking for shipwrecks from the medieval period or even from the 20th century or the 19th century, but are looking at the flooded continental shelves. And it's just starting. This work should have been happening for decades. It's just beginning. I think that's going to reveal a great deal. And I know it's going to reveal a great deal because I found a great deal. But I want to add that the Amazon rainforest and the Sahara Desert are also underserved by archaeology.
Yes.
And we can't claim that there was no lost civilization of the Ice Age while there's so much of the world we never looked at all.
Especially the Sahara Desert, right? Because there could be
Fascinating.
thousands of pyramids just covered in mounds of sand right now.
They really could.
We are finding a lot in the Amazon.
Yes.
The LiDAR in the Amazon.
The LiDAR work in the Amazon is fascinating.
Okay,
I hope to be back in the Amazon within the next few months.
Okay, I want to, while we're talking about Amazon, ayahuasca.
Yes.
Psychedelics.
I'm into this.
Okay.
Do psychedelics.
Yes. And how they tie into
These myths.
in ancient civilization and potentially using the knowledge or experience gained from these psychedelic drugs to maybe build these huge megalithic structures.
Yeah.
How big a role do you think psychedelics have played in prehistory?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we should never look for ourselves in the past, because we've had the horrific, vicious, evil thing called the war on drugs for the past 50+ years, which is gradually going away, thank God. You know, but we're a culture that's hated psychedelics since the time of Richard Nixon, and we kind of just assumed that every culture in antiquity also hated psychedelics. No, they didn't. They were deeply involved with psychedelics, whether you're talking about the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece.
What's that?
It was a temple, the Temple of Eleusis. It stands just outside of Athens in Greece, what's left of it. They served up a potion to all the initiates. And the initiates included Sophocles, Pindar, Plato himself. All the great minds of ancient world went to Eleusis. They were given this brew, which was called the kykion. Then they went down into these deep chambers underneath the temple of Eleusis. And then they had extraordinary experiences, which gave them revelations about the nature of reality. They ceased to fear death. They knew that they knew that death was not the end. They had no fear of death anymore after they'd had this experience. It sounds a lot like a psychedelic experience. And then we have the work that's been done on that brew. And that brew was made, we're told it was made from barley, mint, and water. But what grows on barley is Claviceps paspali, which is an LSD-like fungus.
I love it.
Ergot,
I love it.
which is soluble in water. There are ergots that are very dangerous, but there are also ergot. Ergot is the class of fungus to which this belongs.
Okay.
And some of them are extremely dangerous. But this one is soluble in water, is not dangerous, and is basically LSD. They were drinking LSD in the Temple of Eleusis, and they were having revelations about the meaning of life, and they were creating great philosophy and brilliant ideas at the time. It's of course massively connected to this surge of intellectual activity in ancient Greece. But ayahuasca.
Or even before we get to ayahuasca, what were we discussing earlier? Is the pineal gland that you see represented in like as the pine cone? I saw it when I was in the Vatican. There's like this pine cone.
There's one at the Vatican. They're pictured in many of the Mesopotamian reliefs that show the 7 sages. They're holding a pine cone to somebody's head, you know.
Yeah.
There's a suggestion that the pineal gland, it has been suggested that the pineal gland secretes dimethyltryptamine.
DMT.
DMT. I think that the more recent work on that suggests it probably doesn't, but that it's a locus for endogenous. All of us have DMT in our bodies. We're all illegal here.
Yeah, we're all carriers.
We're all carriers. It's a natural brain hormone.
Yeah.
The exact question of where in the body it's generated, some people think it might be the lungs these days. Wherever it is, it's there.
Yeah.
And the pineal is associated with it in a number of ways, and it's associated. The pineal is the third eye. It was an eye. The pineal was an eye. It still is in some amphibians.
That's why it's called the third eye.
It has a lens, a cornea, and a retina.
We've just evolved out of it.
Yeah, it's gone deeper into the brain. It's no longer light sensitive, but it's still arguably the third eye. So the connection of the pineal and DMT is not absolutely clear, but there is likely some connection.
Okay, so the idea of us looking for ourselves in the past, we're looking at how people build the pyramids, and we're going, well, we have these cranes. Where are your cranes?
Where are your cranes? Yeah.
Instead of looking for the things that we are not utilizing that they may utilize, which are psychedelic drugs, and maybe that gave them access to. It's stupid to use the word powers because I think it kind of dismisses everything, but maybe they give them access to some sort of like otherworldly knowledge that could have helped them create.
Well, it's an interesting discussion, actually. Yeah. The interesting thing about psychedelics, one of the many interesting things about psychedelics, is. For a start, new evidence that's emerging from scientific studies. At last, psychedelics have been taken out of the closet and are being examined for their therapeutic potential. And one of the things that it's very clear that psilocybin definitely does is
mushrooms.
Mushrooms,
yeah.
Which is closely related to DMT. It's a kind of orally ingestible form of DMT. They promote neuroplasticity. They cause new neurons to grow in the brain. They make us smarter. Let us pay great tribute to Terence McKenna, a brilliant thinker in this field, whose book, whose stoned ape hypothesis, and whose book, The Food of the Gods, was one of the early recognitions that psychedelics may have been the trigger that took our ancestor out of millions of years of boredom and put them on the path that we recognize as modern humanity.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing. Also, the way that psychedelics are very helpful with depression is very interesting. And why is that the case? Depression, and I speak from experience because I've suffered myself from a long period of depression back in the early 90s. Depression is a very narrow, rigid frame of mind, where you get locked into recurring patterns of thought and they're very negative, and you keep on repeating them to yourself, and you start hating yourself, and you just can't bear anything, and you're locked, and you can't escape from it. And what psychedelics seem to do is that they break that. They just break it completely. And in this case, for depression, what seems to work best is a massive dose rather than microdosing. Microdosing is great as well.
You have to snap yourself out of it.
Snap yourself out of it. Get out of that
there's also, like, I think in depressive states, there's a narcissism wrapped into it.
Maybe so, yeah.
Not a narcissism in terms of, like, I'm the best, look at me, everything's about me, but in the negative side of that.
It's all about you still.
Yeah. And that constant negative thought. But taking and having a psychedelic experience will make you realize maybe how small you are in the grand scheme of things, or how you are intertwined into the fabric of humanity, so it can break out of that. Yeah, I like that.
Ego death will disconnect you from the universe conspiring against you.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're not that important.
And if you belong to a species that has been making the same kind of stone tool without any changes for more than 1 million years. Two things are happening. Clearly cultural information is being passed down, and clearly you're locked in a very narrow frame. And then suddenly it changes, and our ancestors start producing this extraordinary cave art, this amazing cave art, whether you're talking about that site Serrania de la Lindosa in Colombia, or whether you're talking about Lascaux Cave in France. The art is stunning, and it is classically psychedelic art. It is featuring geometry, patterns of swirling dots, zigzag lines. There's Serrania de Landosa, and there's one of the extinct Ice Age megafauna with the arrow pointing at it up there. The geometry that's in there, the swirling dots, the sort of interlinked chains that are shown out there on the left. These are all classic psychedelic visions. Very often, as people enter a deeply altered state of consciousness, it starts with geometry and patterns, and then it manifests more into entities. And those entities are often therianthropic in form, Greek therion, wild beast, anthropos, man. They're part human, part animal in form. Not something that you see every day, but something that is
very common in
frequently common, very common in Egyptian art, and very, very common in deeply altered states of consciousness brought on by psychedelics, is the encounter with entities who then appear to communicate with us. And again, this is where the archaeologists roll their minds, because they like to think that consciousness is entirely local to the brain. It's all manufactured by the brain, and this is just our brain on drugs. Whereas in fact, the opposite seems to be true. The brain seems to be acting as a receiver for consciousness rather than as a manufacturer of consciousness.
What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that we have to function in a very tough physical universe. This is this world. We got to know the laws of physics, even if we don't know them, as written down in scientific textbooks. We got to know that if we bump into that wall, it's going to hurt. We got to understand all of that. And naturally, our main focus is on our physical survival in this physical realm. And what's useful for that is what is rightly called the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. But there are many other states of consciousness that are available to us, and psychedelics unleash a completely different state of consciousness from the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. And in that state of consciousness, we have these extraordinary experiences, and amongst those experiences, the most important are the encounters with entities that communicate with us. Now, we have a problem in trying to decide what is going on here. A very important project just underway at Imperial College in London, and another project that's going to be launched in Colorado, I think in Denver itself, within this year, where human volunteers, I hope to be one of them in Colorado. They turned me down in London because I've suffered from epilepsy since 2017. And there's no indication whatsoever that DMT would cause epilepsy, and I've smoked loads of DMT, and I know it doesn't cause epilepsy. But understandably, having gone through all the legal hoops to get permission, they don't want me dying in their lab. So they've not accepted me as a volunteer, but I'm hoping I might get accepted as a volunteer here in America. What it is extended release DMT, DMTX. DMT is normally
So it's just going to keep you high?
Keep you high for an hour,
Instead of, what is DMT, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
And how long does it feel when you're high for 5 minutes, 10 minutes on DMT?
Oh, when you're in the DMT space, it can feel like forever.
So an hour is almost horrifying.
Does time not exist?
Well, yes, this is what many of the volunteers say, is that it's an alarming prospect to be in that space for an hour. They're being delivered it by drip constantly directly into their bloodstream. They can signal at any time, I've had enough, if they're really feeling overwhelmed. But by and large, most of the volunteers went through with it. I moderated a panel with four of the volunteers.
Anything interesting that they say about it?
And a gentleman called Andrew Gallimore, who's invented the technology that's going to be used in Colorado. Yes, the very interesting thing is that all appeared to be meeting essentially the same entities.
These are the gnome-looking
machine elves.
They might be machine elves, they might be gnomes, they might be therianthropes, but they're playful, they're tricksy, they're tricksters, and they convey knowledge. And they're also moral teachers. This is the funny thing. They make us confront our baggage.
How so?
Well, I can say in my case, I recently had an experience with the other kind of DMT, very recently, which is 5-MeO DMT. The DMT we're talking about is NN-DMT.
Okay.
And that is the one that most frequently produces entity encounters and the sense of telepathic communication with entities. And science is not in a position to write that off. Quantum physics is looking at the possibility of multiple dimensions, very open to that possibility. Maybe what's happening is that our consciousness is getting retuned by DMT to gain access to dimensions of reality that are normally close to us. We think reality is just this, but actually it's all this. And in a deeply altered state of consciousness, the need for the alert problem-solving mindset is damped down,
Suppressed.
and we can open up to other areas of reality. Who knows what's going on there? The issue is, are people learning something new in this state? This would touch on the question of whether psychedelics were helpful in energizing an ancient civilization and getting it going. I would cite the very well-known case of Kerry Mullis, the polymerase chain reaction, PCR test, which has been fundamental for all DNA work subsequently. He admitted openly that he would never have made that discovery if he hadn't taken LSD. Wow. LSD gave him that discovery.
You said you recently had an experience with the other type
with
of DMT.
5-MeO.
Yeah. What was that?
It was beautiful. Okay, so 5-MeO DMT is a bit controversial because in the basic form it comes from the secretions of a particular kind of toad. And those secretions can be scraped off and smoked directly. In that case, the smoke is quite cloudy, you're ingesting not only the 5-MeO DMT, but other elements that are in the secretions of the toad. It's possible to have synthetic 5-MeO DMT, which is pure, which doesn't have the other elements in the secretions of the toad, and which doesn't involve killing toads. And that's the kind of 5-MeO DMT that I had, was in a pure synthetic form. I was alarmed before I did it because I had alarming experiences on the other DMT, NN-DMT. Our facilitator helped me out and helped others in the group out by giving us MDMA first. We had.
Wow. You were getting it in, Cram.
We're totally getting it in. It's only the second time in my life I've ever experienced MDMA.
Oh, it's great.
MDMA, what a great thing!
Oh, it's amazing.
God, I mean,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And
Yeah.
you feel so just overwhelmed with love. It's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So we had that 3 or 4 hours before we had the 5-MeO DMT, and then 3 at a time we lay down, and well, we first sat up to take one massive deep inhalation on the pipe, and then hold it in, and then release it, and then. My wife Santa can do this and sit up. She does it with NN-DMT, and she did it with the 5-MeO as well. Just sit up, and she does these mudras. Very, very present. I have to lie down. I can't be seated. I can't be standing up. I got to lie down flat. And I actually pulled on an eye mask as I was lying down. And then just the only visionary element of the 5-MeO was like a feather with an eye at the end of it. But most of it was about how I need to honor and respect and love my wife. And how I...
That was the mantra she was doing, is to get you to see that.
You know, that I have to, yeah. But that I have a problem with anger. I get angry too quickly, and that anger can be very hurtful to other people, and particularly hurtful to my wife. And it showed me that, and basically said, you gotta fix this.
And how does it show to you? Is it intuition, or
it was more intuition. It wasn't a scene of me shouting,
Yeah.
but it was a recognition that that's what I do, and that it's harmful and useless, and it's harmful to me, and it's harmful to everybody around
So
me.
there's a communication with a celestial being without any words at all.
Without any words, but you get it. The other intention that I said, I had 3 goes on the pipe on that day, with about an hour and a half between each one. And on the 3rd go, my intention was more selfish. My intention was that I should, could it help me to get rid of my migraine headaches? Because I suffer very badly from migraines. In fact, it's a kind of curse. And I wanted to focus on that. Maybe there's some way that it could affect me. And I did feel, perhaps it was my imagination, but I did feel fingers massaging the back of my head where migraines often start, and then massaging my temple. And then abruptly it stopped, and it returned to the issue of my relationships. and I thought that it stopped like that because the 5-MeO DMT had fixed my migraines. But the very next day, I had another massive migraine. And I think what happened was that 5-MeO DMT was saying, actually, we can't fix this. Let's move on to something more important. It was an extraordinary experience. I wouldn't recommend anybody to do it completely alone or any kind of DMT. I think it's important to have a responsible facilitator who's used to handling people in this state. Everybody responds in different ways.
Yeah.
Some people can really freak out. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to freak out. It's not necessarily a bad thing to feel fear. But you want somebody around who's a sitter, who understands the medicine and who can help you through that.
You said earlier that it removes you from the problem-solving consciousness state.
Which we're normally in. We're
Right.
normally thinking of the next problem we have to deal with.
How do we fit? And then I think oftentimes in that state, we're not dealing with the problems that we have internally. We're not dealing with the trauma, the relationship, those things. So it's
Often we're blaming them on other people.
exactly.
Yeah.
So what's kind of interesting to me is even the way that you describe it, it's put a pause on those problems that we feel like we have to solve in every second to do kind of like self-work.
Inner work.
I wonder what is on the other end of self-work. Like, I wonder when you get through a lot of those things that you need to work on, where else they can take you. Because I don't think they go, you're good, see you later. Maybe you start to seek some of that. Maybe you need to deal with all of your stuff before you're ready for that higher consciousness.
Or maybe both things can happen all the time, because virtually every powerful psychedelic journey I have, and ayahuasca is certainly that. And my last ayahuasca journey was in 2019. DMT, NN-DMT more recently, and then 5-MeO-DMT. They all sooner or later deal with my baggage. I carry a lot of baggage. Those of us who carry less baggage tend to have a gentler trip. But in my case, it's right in my face, and you've got to deal with it.
And you keep going after it.
I keep going after it because it's very useful teaching, and I keep slipping back into bad habits.
So it's a reminder.
Yeah, and it's really important to recognize that these substances are not a magic pill. It's going to fix you overnight.
I think people use them as that.
They're not. They're not.
I think they've become trendy in a way, and I think a lot of people are seeking out ayahuasca because they're like, hey, I have this block, and if I just do this ayahuasca, it's going to fix it for me, and then it's done.
Chances are it'll be done for a few weeks, and then you'll fall back into the old pattern.
It's like a chiropractor or something.
You have to carry on the work. Yeah, the real work begins after the session.
So it's a recognition of what's going on, what you have to confront, and then you have to do that work
and
afterwards.
then you have to do that work. But as to novelty, I mentioned Kerry Mullis and the polymerase chain reaction. The other interesting one is Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Did I mention them?
No, but they've been.
They also were very forthright, particularly Wozniak, that the Apple computer would not have been invented without LSD.
Wow.
And Francis Crick, who's the discoverer of the double helix form of DNA, along with other colleagues, he was a regular user of LSD in the 1960s before it was illegal, and the 50s. And he also suggested that he first got it. He got the double helix form under the influence of LSD. So these are scientific examples of people who are making a quantum leap forward in knowledge as a result of their psychedelic experiences, not as a result of their alert problem-solving state of consciousness that we value so highly, but as a result of a completely other state of consciousness. In my case, the novelty I got was I was given a novel during 5 ayahuasca sessions in Brazil. I had never written novels before. I always write nonfiction, and I still mainly write nonfiction. But I was given a novel. I was given the whole plot of the novel, and I ended up writing that novel.
No.
The session was in 2007. I finished the novel in 2010. It was called Entangled. I had no idea that I had a novel in me, and perhaps my readers don't like it. I don't care. I found an area of myself that was new to me, and I was able to...
The entire story existed to you.
Yeah.
Now, explain to me how it existed, like plot, beginning, middle, end, or existed like character.
I saw the principal characters, and I saw the setting. It was 2 young women, one living in the time of the Neanderthals and one living today, who were literally entangled in space and time. And it was the use of psychedelics in both times that enabled them to be entangled, and that they were brought together by an entity that they referred to. Sorry, my critics are going to go wild with this. They're going to drug shame me forever. But you know, they were brought together by an entity called the Blue Angel, whose purpose that there's a demon who travels through time called Sulpa. He's seeking to destroy everything that's good about humanity, and he's doing that in 2 time frames, in the time of the Neanderthals and today. And this Blue Angel entity brings together these 2 young women in these 2 different time frames to do battle against the demon. That was the story that I was given, and that was the story that I wrote.
Do you see it like a movie, or how does that present itself to you?
I did see it a bit like a movie. Yeah, I did. I saw scenes. I saw my young character from the Stone Age, Rhea, throwing stones very brilliantly at her enemies, and I saw the connection between these two women, and the sense of a supernatural battle of good against evil, against which the human story is played out, and that ultimately we humans always have a choice. We always have a choice between good and evil. It might be at a very small scale, or it might be at a very large scale. If it's at a very large scale, it can do enormous damage to human society as a whole. If it's at a very small scale, it can do enormous damage to us and those immediately close to us. But it was that sense of that happening. Anyway, I didn't have a novel in me before that. I've never tried.
Have you seen other works, not just literary works, but film, music, that you've immediately connected to and thought, oh, this is inspired by hallucinogenics? This reminds me of an experience that I had. Is there, it could be a cartoon for children.
Avatar.
Right? 100% or no? Like,
Yes.
but isn't Avatar from, what was that, the original, people say that,
Pocahontas, I think.
No. There's like a, almost like an anime thing that people thought it was a little bit
I'm
too
not sure,
sensitive.
but somebody involved in that story was definitely experiencing altered states
Really?
of consciousness.
Apparently, JFK had experiences with psychedelics.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, wow.
Again, this is a mistake that our society has made, is to cut us. And maybe it's not a mistake. I don't really do conspiracy theories, but maybe it was a deliberate thing back when the war on drugs was declared. It's under,
Well, we did a lot of research with psychedelics.
Psychedelics lead people to ask questions. They don't leave us comfortable with the prevailing order of things, both in ourselves and with the way society functions. And we begin to become critical and questioning in a way that we might not have been before.
Yeah.
And I think this was felt to be dangerous, and they were demonized with lies and complete dishonesty. But they were.
Do you remember when psychedelics were gaining popularity? This is what, 19...
when you say gaining popularity...
60s, mainstream popularity.
Well, I don't think you could call hippies, mainstream in
So
any
funny,
way.
the way that we look back on them, they were the mainstream.
Woodstock is everything.
Yeah.
It was like they're the dominant culture, but I guess they were fringe and odd for the time.
They were fringe and odd, and they were
So funny.
and they were feared by those rooted and grounded in mainstream culture.
Yeah, hippie was a pejorative, right?
Yeah, it was a pejorative. He's just a hippie.
Yeah.
It was a negative term. So I guess that we're looking at a shift in human consciousness that certainly began probably in the late 50s and was well underway in the 60s. And had it been allowed to continue, it might well have transformed society in many, many ways. But then it was clamped down upon, and all these lies and propaganda were spread, false stories about how dangerous psychedelics are. I want to be very clear about that. Psychedelics are extremely serious business.
Yeah.
And this needs to be understood. I do not believe that psychedelics are for children, or cannabis for that matter. I think we'd be much better keeping them out of the hands of children if they were totally legal, and it was accompanied by wise advice.
They can also unearth existing psychological issues.
Yes, they can.
You have to be really dangerous. Yeah, really careful.
If somebody's suffering from schizophrenia, psychedelics could be very bad news. So
and a lot of people don't know that they have schizophrenia.
A lot of people don't,
especially
know.
if they're.
So there is an element of danger and risk, and this is why a sitter who's deeply experienced with the substance is.
Sitter is your shaman, essentially.
Yeah. We haven't yet invented a word for shaman in Western culture, but we need to. The word comes from Tungus Mongol. It means one who sees, and it was then applied by anthropologists because they found that figure, that person who played that role was found in multiple different cultures all around the world. And they said, let's just call them all shamans.
Right.
But the word comes from a specific culture. We don't have a word for that in our culture yet. Facilitator or sitter are the ones that I use. This is one of the many areas where Western culture would do well to learn from indigenous cultures that have been using psychedelics responsibly for thousands and thousands of years.
What is responsible psychedelic use to you? What do you start with? What do you do it with?
Intentions, meditation, things like that.
Yeah, it's intentions, meditations. It's not recreational. You're not taking.
Enjoy the swamp.
How can I help?
It to have a party. You're taking it to make contact with the dead. Ayahuasca means the vine of the dead or the vine of souls. Ibogaine is the Iboga is the plant that enables people to see the dead. That's what these things mean. There's so much of a connection to the afterlife with them, and that's a serious inquiry. You know, if you've lost a relative recently and you've not had closure, it can be very beneficial to have an afterlife contact with that person, and many people report this experience. And I've had the experience myself with Iboga.
Really?
Yeah, I met my dad. He passed away shortly before that. Now again, the scientists could say, you were just fantasizing that. It was just your imagination. But I met him.
Fuck the scientists. So what happened?
He came to me in the vision. It was shadowy, but he basically made me feel okay about the key issue, which was I was not with him at his deathbed, and I was haunted by that. And after that.